So we've just found out that this week we are going to have that 50 people being swapped with the French deal coming into force. You may remember a few weeks back we had Starmer and Macron shaking hands and doing this big announcement when Macron came to visit. And apparently the scheme is all ready to go. We're going to, this week, start sending 50 people back to France, and we're going to get 50 people in return. And apparently this is going to be a deterrent that's going to smash the gangs, as Starmer would say. But is it actually going to work? Well, I've got the brilliant Rafe Heydel Mankoo from the New Culture Forum with me to discuss that today. But let's take a look at some of the details of this scheme first. So this is in the Telegraph. The process of deporting the first channel migrants is going to begin within a few days. Starmer has announced. He has said that we've ratified a treaty with France, which means that those entering the UK on a small boat can now be detained on arrival and returned across the channel. We're expecting around 50 migrants a week to be swapped. We're told that figure may go up because this is a pilot to start with, but we will see. And migrants will be detained for deportation in the coming days before being deported. So it's all ready, apparently, to get off the ground. Rafe, do you think that this is actually going to be a meaningful deterrent? Is this going to stop the boats? Is there any hope with this new policy that's been announced?
It's not going to make a single jot of difference, you know. I mean, the odds of getting deported from this country are so slim and so slight that there's no deterrent factor there whatsoever. I mean, based upon that 50 migrant figure, in a year, that would be far less than 10% of the total number of migrants who come over. Even if they increase it, it's not going to come anywhere near close to acting as a deterrent because, quite frankly, people will have a 10 or 12 or 13 to 1 chance. I'm sure there are some sort of bingo odds that are but best better than that. It's like using a teaspoon to empty a swimming pool. There was a deterrent. There was a deterrent in effect. We had that with Rwanda. Not an ideal scheme. I was never greatly enthusiastic about it, but we saw that it was having some effect psychologically. We saw a mass exodus of migrants to the Republic of Ireland, for example. What you really need to do is you need to have a real hostile environment policy, not the milquetoast policy that we saw from Theresa May, but a real policy. First thing, of course, is let immigrants know, cross-channel migrants know, they will never set foot on British soil. So what I've said is you get old cruise ships, put them in the channel. When people come across the channel, if they can't be turned back, they're put onto these old cruise ships. Once the cruise ships are filled up, they're sailed off to the South Georgia Islands, which is a British overseas territory. Therefore, the European Convention of Human Rights won't come into play as it did with Rwanda not being a safe space. We govern the South Georgia Islands, but there are other islands, the Ascension Islands or whatever. And if migrants know that they're never actually going to set foot on British soil, that they'll be processed and deported from an offshore island, perhaps a windswept island in the Atlantic, that will make them think twice about that. The Australians did this with the island of Nauru, which is over 1,000 miles off the coast of Australia. They had great success with that. That's how you solve all of this. And you also need to, of course, as I've said for years, and only now, this is what's so frustrating. Many of us have been talking about some of this stuff for years. Now you're getting the governments finally saying, well, perhaps we should make Britain less attractive than France. I mean, as if it took them, decades to come up with this genius idea. Empty all the migrant hotels, yes, that's fine. But where are the migrants going? They're going into private accommodation now. And actually, what's worse for somebody? To have a group of migrants in a golf course somewhere in the countryside, or have them living right next door to you. What you need to do is empty all the migrant hotels, empty all the private accommodation. Remember, there are about 33,000 migrants in hotels. There are over 70,000 in private accommodation. Don't get distracted by what the government says when they talk about closing down migrant hotels. They're coming and living right next door to many, many people. We need to empty the private accommodation and build refugee camps. After the Second World War, there were 250,000 Polish refugees in this country, the Polish army, but also their wives and their children. And they lived in those camps for up to 15 years, got married, had children in those camps. If 1940s quality camps were good enough for women and children, if they're still good enough for our armed forces, why the hell are we putting young men of fighting age into luxury 4- and 5-star accommodation? crack down on the underground economy, the Deliveroo apps, but also the curry houses, so forth. Crack down on the rogue landlords who basically have 6 or 7 or 10 people living in a 2-bedroom or 1-bedroom flat. Don't do background checks on people who are coming over here. That's how you get serious. The one good thing, the only good thing about this new deal with France is that apparently the French are going to copy the Belgians and won't be too scared to get their sandals wet in the water when they go. Because up to this point, nobody leaves Belgium. Very few people ever leave Belgium to cross the Channel because the Belgian police will go into the water and seize the boats in shallow waters and destroy them and pull them back. The French have refused to do that, citing health and safety laws, and the French unions have been a huge obstacle to that. Now, if the French, under this new treaty, as it seems to be the case, will go in, will slash these dinghies. I mean, again, none of this is rocket science. It just takes an old Stanley knife. Uh, then you will hopefully be able to see the beginning of some deterrence. But right now, all of this seems to me to be performative, and I can't see really how any of it will have any traction, let alone the fact, of course, that who's communicating this new treaty to the migrants themselves? I often say this. The Danes were very good. When the Danes brought in new legislation to try to crack down on asylum seekers, and they brought their figures back to levels not seen since the 1990s, they would advertise the fact in the Middle East. They would take out adverts in papers, big billboards saying, "This stay in Germany, stay in France, stay at home. Anywhere is better than coming here." We need to be a bit more aggressive and assertive in doing the same.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, migrants, even when they've got to France and they're thinking about crossing to Britain and waiting in Calais or Dunkirk to cross to Britain, if you ask them, do they know exactly what the rules are, the asylum application rules, and whether or not they can bring family members with them and all of this, they don't really know. They just think, oh yeah, I like the sound of Britain, I'm going to give that a go. So educating them is very important. But I just wanted to pick up on one thing you said, just to play devil's advocate. You said that this policy to send 50 back a week to France is not going to be a meaningful deterrent because it's a very small number of people. But then you praised the Rwanda plan, and the Rwanda plan also would have only sent back a very small number of people. I personally was very sceptical about Rwanda for that reason, but then when I visited Calais before the general election last year in May, June kind of time, and spoke to migrants who said, we are waiting until Keir Starmer gets into power to cross because we're genuinely worried about Rwanda, I realised, these migrants, they're not actually educated as to how many people are going to be sent to Rwanda. They don't know, and so they are genuinely worried. So if Rwanda was proving to work as a deterrent before it even came into place, when only a small number were going to be sent there, could you not say the same for this policy where it's only 15 being sent back a week?
No. Well, firstly, I didn't praise the Rwanda scheme. I said that the Rwanda scheme was better than this current proposal. It did act as a sort of deterrent, didn't go anywhere near far enough. And that's one of the reasons. Again, the numbers you're talking about with the Rwanda scheme were pitiful. As well, the other issue, which is similar to this one, is that it's a, buy one, get one free, right? So eventually we were going to give Rwanda an Eritrean or a Somali, and we were going to get back someone from Rwanda in exchange. This policy is the same thing with the migrant scheme. We're going to get rid of 50, but we're going to have others come over here. None of this is reducing the total number of people coming. We're just trading. This is like top trumps, right? Well, I'll have one of yours and you give me one of yours. What we need to be much stronger about is talking about the cultural change this country is going through. And we need to basically, I have advocated for years now, we need the real thing that governments should be doing in the West is getting together at the UN and getting rid of the 1951 UN Convention on Refugees. Now, this convention was created for a post-war world which was dealing with two questions. What do we do with the Jews, and what do we do with the Slavs, the Eastern Europeans who couldn't go back to the communist world, including members of my own family, because they would be imprisoned for who they are and potentially executed. And so that's why had the 51 convention. Nobody foresaw the huge transcontinental mass migration that advances in public transport created over the succeeding decades. What we need is a new convention. We need to tear up the 1951 convention, create a new convention that states that refugees must be rehoused within their continent of origin. So if you're fleeing Sudan, or you go to Kenya or South Africa, If you're fleeing Palestine, you go elsewhere in the Middle East. You're
Mm.
fleeing Vietnam, you go elsewhere in Asia. You're fleeing Ukraine, yes, you come into Europe. Because ultimately and fundamentally, this is about culture. And
Yes.
refugees will be happier being in a culture that's similar to their own and a religion that's similar to their own. And also, they'll be physically closer to their homeland. And the goal must eventually be to return these people back home. And they're far more likely to go back home if they are living within their own continent than if they're 2,000, 3,000 miles away or whatever in Europe or America.
Yes, absolutely. And that 1951 Refugee Convention is just, it's not fit for purpose in today's day and age. And there's been quite a bit of, I've seen a few articles coming out talking about the EU actually thinking of scrapping that, people in the EU thinking of getting rid of it now because they're really struggling with, this issue themselves just as much as we are. Do you think that they will scrap that?
I hope so. I mean, the thing is, I've been campaigning on this for a decade at least. I'm very heartened to see that these discussions have now finally broken through. My gosh, we'd been what a better place we'd be if we were brave enough to have these conversations years ago. But it's, we're still talking about the European Convention on Human Rights. We still haven't reversed the Human Rights Act, the Blairite legislation that made our courts and our government pay heed to the European Court on Human Rights. You know, why haven't we repealed any of that? This is what makes me worried, is that it doesn't take much to actually sort out the crisis that we're facing, and yet there never seems to be the political will to do that. And actually, we don't even need to leave the European Convention on Human Rights. Denmark was repeatedly hauled before the European Court because of its strict policies on immigration. And they said, well, what are you going to do about it, right? There's no international police force that can actually enforce, nations are sovereign. You can get a slap on the wrist and you can get perhaps sanctions by someone put against you. But really, in this, who's going to put sanctions on Denmark or Britain in the real world? We must feel that yes, the rule of law is very important. And Britain, unlike many European countries, it stands alone as being the country that always tries to defend the rule of law. But unfortunately, now we have bad law. This is hampering our ability to look after what's even more important, and that's the safety and security of our own peoples. So yes, get out of the European Convention of Human Rights, but until we do that, we should just simply ignore it.
I completely agree. I mean, there are plenty of other countries that ignore the ECHR. France has ignored them to chuck terrorists out the country. Other countries, when they see the ECHR does something bonkers, they just say, oh, well, that's stupid, we're just going to ignore it. Yet we decided to, when we had a plane on the ground ready to take off to Rwanda, listen to the ECHR when they at the last minute said that plane cannot take off. But anyways, another thing on this story is, as we've said, we've got one in, one out with the French. We're going to get 50 back from France for every 50 we send. And we've been told the type of people we're going to be receiving are people who have family connections in the UK. Do you trust the French to adhere to that? Or do you think the French might use this to send us the bad apples?
Yeah, well, look, the main part of England's foreign policy, the better part of 500 years, has been based upon mistrust of the French. And I don't see why we should change that at all. I mean, it's also very telling, where people are describing this new deal with France as a treaty. Britain and France have signed a treaty. Now, most people would expect a treaty to last for decades, for 50, 100 years, or perhaps last forever. This is only lasting for 1 year. I mean, that
Yeah, in
doesn't.
fact, let's just show the details on that. So this deal with the French, it's just a pilot scheme, and it's going to expire in less than a year. This is in the GB News article. So this is going to terminate in June 2026, which is just 47 weeks away. And the reason why this is so significant is that is leaving it to whoever comes after Macron, who is not necessarily going to win that next election. There's a very good chance he is going to be gone. This relies on whoever Macron's successor is to renew this policy. Do you really think whoever comes after Macron is going to renew this, Rafe?
Yeah, I mean, well, it depends who's coming in, but it's difficult to see how it's in the electoral advantage of any French party to say that actually they're going to go through with a deal like this. It won't go down well, as it wouldn't go down well in this country where the roles reversed, quite simply. But look, the thing here is bringing people over because they have some family connection over here. This is the entire purpose of the cross-channel small boats. There's a reason that these are young men, right? They're not genuine refugees. They are not asylum seekers. These are not even economic migrants, as I call them. They're economic scouts. And I like to call them scouts because that's what they are. The family have put together money to send one of their sons over to this country to get established here for the sole purpose of bringing the rest of the family over as dependents. So all that this new treaty does is it legitimizes and justifies. It's a win for those families because they can say, well, it was worth it because now we have a path of action over here. And you just have to compare those people who are coming on the small boats with the genuine refugees, and those are the Ukrainians. And who are the Ukrainians in this country? They are women, they are the elderly, they are children, they are the infirm and disabled. That's what the real thing is. If you are a genuine refugee, you are not a young man leaving your wife, your mother, your sister, your daughter back home to fend for themselves, are you? Clearly, they are not fleeing terror and everything else. They're simply looking for a better way of life. You can't blame them. I'm sure we'd all do the same in that position. But again, all that this does is essentially, I would say, it incentivizes more than deters in many respects.
Yeah, and you're absolutely spot on about families saving up to send one person with the hope that they will be able to bring everyone else from the family over. And we've just found out that the number of family members of so-called refugees that are able to come to this country each year is now over 20,000, which has gone up from about 4,000 just a few years ago. So on top of, well, we may be on track to have maybe around 50,000 crossing the channel this year, but Rishi Sunak had brought it down to 30,000 to his credit. We've also got another 20,000 family members coming across, and there's no requirement for them to show that they're going to earn a certain amount of money, be net contributors to the economy. I mean, in fact, if it's the women and children, although the upside is that they're unlikely to be going around raping and sexually assaulting anybody, they're probably going to be living off the state, let's be honest. Now, one more thing before I let you go, Rafe. I just want to, related to these migrant stories, talk about this story. So we've just found out today that Keir Starmer is calling for police to be as transparent as possible with the ethnicity of sex offence suspects. Now, this comes just after we have had Nigel Farage doing one of these Britain is Lawless press conferences, saying that the Warwickshire Council, you know, they were right to put the pressure on the police who were, he says, trying to cover up the ethnicity of the man who has allegedly raped a 12-year-old girl in the Nuneaton area. We can't go into the specific details of that case, of course, because it is ongoing and we don't want to risk contempt of court. But do you think this is the right move by Keir Starmer, Rafe, to call on police to release ethnicity in the case of sexual offences?
Absolutely, and they should be going far faster. They should be passing legislation on this point. You know, the way that they're going about it by referring things to the Law Commission and talking to the College of Policing, this is far too slow. This is essentially, you know, a matter that will take months, if not longer, before anything concrete comes out of it. People must understand here we have imported millions of culturally incompatible peoples who come from cultures and have ways of life which many of us would find abhorrent. You know, 1/4 of sexual assault convictions last year were of foreign nationals. You have specific groups of people, you know, Afghans are up to 22 times more likely to commit sexual offence than a member of the British population. In London, almost half of sex offence charges are made up by foreign nationals. So we need to wake up to what's happening here. We even have a top 10 list already of countries. We know if people from the countries that are most overrepresented in terms of sexual offences: Eritreans, Somalis, Sudan, Iraq, Iran, Bangladesh, Pakistan. We know the countries. Why? So we don't even need to look at the overall trend of foreign nationals committing offences. We know the top 10, 15, 20. Why are we continuing to admit people from those countries? You know, Donald Trump Jr. said it very well back in 2016, I think. He said, if I gave you a bowl of M&Ms and told you that 5 or 6 of them were poisoned, would you take a handful of them? We know what's happening here. The Danes have been keeping this information for a long time. The Swedes as well. I mean, in France, we know 77% of convictions in Paris for sexual assault are for foreign nationals.
Oh,
I
really?
think it's
Wow.
in Germany, I think it's Afghans are 69 times more likely to commit sexual offences than a
Wow.
native German. The stats are phenomenal. We've
Mm.
seen in this country, in the last decade in this country, rape has quadrupled. And it's no surprise that 2015 was the beginning of the sort of the migrant crisis from outside of Europe. The
Mm.
Boris wave of immigration came right after that. So as mass immigration from North Africa and the Middle East and the subcontinent has increased, we've seen a quadrupling of rape. There's a reason now, if you're on the tube, you're seeing in the London Underground in London, you're seeing signs warning you about sexual pressing,
Mm.
sexual staring, all of these sorts of things. We need to wake up. I'm very pleased, even on the BBC this morning, they were talking about ethnicity and crime rates. I'm amazed. I would never have thought we'd get to the day when those things were finally being discussed. It's long overdue, but we need much more rapid action on this.
Yeah, I mean, you're right that the evidence is just crystal clear at this point. It's just stacking up from, country after country coming out with similar stats. And it drives me insane whenever I'm on panels with a lefty. Whenever we bring this up, they say, oh, no, that's not true at all. And they start making up their own stats saying that, oh, there's absolutely no difference. And they don't understand proportionality whatsoever. I mean, you told me there about a quarter of sexual offences committed are by foreign nationals. And they look at that and go, oh, look, white people make up more than half, therefore they're more likely to do it. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, do you not understand how statistics work in the slightest? Anyway,
Yeah, but
Rafe,
it's also,
thank you. Sorry, go on.
so, no, yeah, but one other point. There's another important point here that's also underplaying and downplaying the figures here, and that's that we're always talking about foreign nationals. It's
Mm,
not taking into account second and third generation immigrants. So that's why we had,
mm,
for example, with the Southport murders, it was so easy for the BBC and Sky News and the government to say, "Oh well, the perpetrator of the Southport murders, Axel Rudapagana, he wasn't an asylum seeker. He was a Welsh choir boy." So often the terrorist attacks that we've seen and the sexual assaults that we see are by the children of asylum seekers, the children of immigrants,
mm.
and
We
those are
saw that in
also
Manchester
skewed.
as well.
So that's what my problem is here. Again, when the people on the left say, "Oh, well, only one quarter are foreign nationals; the rest are committed by white British." Actually, no. If you want to actually look, London is 37% white British. Over half of approximately half of the sexual offence convictions are for foreign nationals, but the rest of that are also, British-born ethnic minorities committing those too. And we need more investigation into the statistics behind that phenomenon.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very, very much for joining us, Rafe. I'm sure the viewers have been loving listening to your views on this. See you soon.
Thank you so much.